You don't always realize when it starts. One conversation here, a small comment there. Over time, someone begins to take more space inside you than they deserve. They drain your energy, twist your words, or simply leave you feeling small. We call them toxic. But Buddhism doesn't label. It invites us to look deeper. What if this pain was a mirror? What if this relationship, no matter how difficult, was a teacher in disguise? In this video, you won't get rules or cold advice. You'll be guided into understanding, not just them, but yourself. Because you don't just need to escape the toxic, you need to return to who you are beneath it all. Let's begin. The mirror that hurts. Sometimes the most painful people in our lives are the ones holding up the clearest mirror. They don't just upset us. They show us where we are still reactive, still afraid, still holding on to wounds we thought were healed. In Buddhist thought, everything is relationship. There is no isolated you and them. Every encounter is a meeting of minds, of energies, of karma. So when someone triggers you with their coldness, their control, their manipulation, the question is not just, why are they like this? It becomes, what is being touched in me? That question doesn't excuse their behavior, but it shifts the focus inward. Maybe their rejection awakens your fear of being abandoned. Maybe their criticism echoes a voice you heard in childhood. Maybe their chaos feeds your own need to fix, to be needed, to prove your worth. It hurts deeply. But pain, seen through the lens of wisdom, becomes a doorway, a moment of choice. Because no matter how toxic someone is, your reaction is yours. And this is where your power begins. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises not just from the outside, but from how we relate to it. A toxic person might bring pain, but if we cling to wanting them to change, if we demand justice, if we keep hoping they will finally understand, we add layers of suffering to the original wound. That's why the first key to freedom is awareness, not fixing the other, but seeing clearly what's happening inside you. The breath becomes your anchor. When they speak with venom, you breathe. When your chest tightens, you notice. When anger rises, you name it, softly, without shame. This presence creates space, and in that space, you don't have to lash out or shut down. You can simply be with what is. This doesn't mean staying silent forever. It means responding instead of reacting. A person who hurts you repeatedly isn't teaching you how to suffer. They're showing you where your work is. Maybe the lesson is to speak up. Maybe it's to walk away. But either way, the first move is inward. Before any boundary is set, before any decision is made, there is this sacred pause. The moment you choose not to abandon yourself in the middle of their chaos. And when you stop abandoning yourself, something incredible happens. You no longer see the other as powerful. You see them as lost, as hurting, as human. That shift, from victim to witness, from resentment to understanding, is the beginning of liberation. It doesn't make the relationship easy, but it makes you free. Because now, even in the presence of their toxicity, you hold peace, not as a shield, not as a weapon, but as a quiet, unshakable truth inside you. Calm inside the storm. You know that moment when their words hit like waves, loud, chaotic, relentless, and all you want is to defend yourself, to prove them wrong, to shout louder than the noise. That's the storm. And you've been in it many times. But what if you didn't have to fight the storm? What if instead you could stand still right in the center of it? The teachings of the Buddha don't tell us to avoid life's storms. They invite us to meet them with awareness so steady it becomes shelter. And when dealing with toxic people, that awareness is not optional, it's essential, because they won't always change. Their manipulation, their blame, their emotional chaos may keep returning. But your peace doesn't have to leave with them. In fact, it's in those exact moments, the most difficult ones, that your inner practice is being shaped. In Buddhist meditation, we learn to sit and observe. Thoughts arise, feelings swirl, discomfort grows. But we don't run. We don't push it away. We stay, we breathe, we watch. Now imagine bringing that same presence to a toxic conversation. Instead of collapsing into old habits, pleasing, arguing, freezing, you breathe. You notice the heat in your chest, the urge in your throat, the tightness in your stomach. You stay grounded in your body, not numb, not distant, but awake. This is not weakness. This is courage. And it's the second key, choosing presence over reaction. Most toxic people are experts at pulling you into their drama. They want to provoke you, shift blame, make you question your sanity. But your power lies in being the one who doesn't take the bait. Because the moment you stop reacting, the entire script changes. You no longer dance to their rhythm. You set your own. You speak only when your voice is steady. You respond only when your heart is clear. And sometimes you don't respond at all. Not from fear, but from wisdom. There is deep strength in restraint, in not proving, not pleasing, not justifying, in letting their chaos pass like a wave crashing on the rocks, and you being the rock. And yes, it takes practice. You will fall, you will slip into old wounds, say things you regret, lose your center. That's human. But the moment you notice it, you're already back on the path, back in the eye of the storm. In Buddhist practice, this returning again and again showings is the real victory. Not perfection, not having the perfect words, but remembering yourself each time you forget. Eventually something shifts. Their words lose power. Their drama feels small, and you start to feel vast inside, like a mountain unmoved by the wind. Because calm is not the absence of storms, it's the unshakable presence you bring to them. And in the presence of your calm, even the most toxic patterns begin to lose their grip. Seeing without judging. You look at them and feel a wave of resistance. Maybe it's anger, maybe exhaustion. Maybe it's the silent thought that whispers, "Why are they like this?" Or worse, "What's wrong with me that I keep allowing this?" That voice, the one that labels, condemns, personalizes, it lives in all of us. It's how the mind tries to protect. It judges because it's afraid. But Buddhism invites us to see differently, not with fear but with clarity. When someone behaves in a toxic way, manipulative, critical, dishonest, it's easy to reduce them to that behavior, to define them by it, to call them narcissist, energy vampire, liar. And maybe those labels feel true. Maybe they help you name the harm. But they also lock you into a narrow lens, one that keeps you stuck in reaction. There's a deeper kind of seeing, one that doesn't condone but understands, one that recognizes this person too is suffering. The third key to liberation is this shift from judgment to observation, not because they deserve your forgiveness right now, not because you should ignore their actions, but because your peace depends on how you see. When you judge, you contract, you grip, you harden, you live in resistance. But when you observe, you soften into presence. You notice their words, you feel your reaction, but you don't fuse with either. You simply witness. This witnessing is powerful. It doesn't mean tolerating abuse. It means refusing to let their pain define your perception. You might see that they're driven by fear, of losing control, of being abandoned, of not being enough. You might see the child behind their cruelty, or maybe you don't see anything clearly yet, just the impact they have on you. That's enough. Your observation begins there. Buddhist practice teaches us that everything changes when we stop making the other person a villain in our story, because the moment we do, we give them the power to shape our emotional world. But when we simply say, here is a person acting from their own suffering, and here is me, witnessing without absorbing, something breaks open, a space appears. In that space, compassion is born, not the kind that makes you stay in harm's way, but the kind that lets you walk away without hate. It's not about fixing them. It's about freeing you from the roles, the patterns, the story that keeps looping in your head. Because you are not here to carry the weight of someone else's wounds, but you can lay yours down, slowly, by choosing to see with clarity instead of judgment. And the clearer your gaze becomes, the more invisible their grip on you becomes. This is how freedom begins, not with a grand escape, but with a quiet shift in how you see. The power of not reacting. There's a moment, it might come in the middle of an argument or just after a message full of blame, where something in you starts to rise, heat in the body, tightness in the throat, that need to say something, defend something, prove something. It's primal, fast, almost impossible to stop. But what if you didn't? What if in that exact moment, instead of reacting, you paused? Not to freeze, not to run away, but to reclaim the space between their action and your response. That space, small at first, is where all your power lives. Buddhism teaches that between stimulus and response lies the possibility of awakening. It's not about suppressing emotion or pretending to be calm. It's about being awake enough to choose, to breathe instead of bite, to feel without becoming the feeling, to see without becoming blind. This is one of the deepest keys, mastering the art of non-reaction, because toxic people thrive on reaction. It feeds their narrative. It gives them control. If you shout, they say you're crazy. If you cry, they call you too sensitive. If you retreat, they accuse you of punishing them. Whatever you do, it becomes fuel, until you do nothing. And this nothing is not weakness, it's presence, it's the fierce clarity of seeing their behavior, manipulation, projection, gaslighting, and refusing to enter the game. You begin to recognize the patterns, the way they twist your words, the way they apologize without changing, the way they pull you close, only to push you away. And in that recognition, you breathe, because when you stop reacting, you stop rehearsing the same script over and over. You give the story back to them, and you choose a different role. Not the victim, not the savior, not the fighter, but the observer, the one who sees clearly and responds wisely. That response might be silence, it might be a calm boundary, it might be walking away, but it comes from awareness, not reactivity. Sometimes silence is the most powerful sentence, sometimes not replying is the loudest truth. And sometimes a single breath held in the middle of chaos is the act that saves you from yourself. But let's be honest, it's not easy. Not when you've been trained, by fear, by trauma, by years of walking on eggshells, to react in order to survive, so you practice. The next time they blame you, you breathe. The next time they twist your words, you feel your feet on the ground. The next time they guilt you, you observe the urge to explain. And you choose to stay with yourself instead. And when you do react, because you will, you don't shame yourself, you see it, you breathe through it, you learn. Over time, something shifts. You stop expecting them to change. You stop trying to convince them of your truth. You stop trying to win. And without that need, you find peace. Not because the other person has become less toxic, but because you've become less available to their chaos. You stop being the puppet. You become the presence. You no longer answer every provocation. You no longer need the last word. You no longer need them to see you, believe you, or validate your worth. That is the moment you begin to heal, because your nervous system, once constantly on edge, starts to calm. Your mind, once tangled in proving and defending, begins to clear. And your heart, once hijacked by their moods, comes home to you. The power of not reacting isn't just a tactic, it's a transformation. It's the turning point where your story changes from surviving others to finally belonging to yourself. Setting boundaries with grace. There comes a point when love is no longer enough, when kindness alone doesn't protect you, when understanding the pain of another person doesn't excuse the pain they keep causing you. And that's when you face the quiet, powerful act that changes everything, drawing a boundary. Not as a wall of punishment, not as an emotional weapon, but as a sacred declaration of your worth. In many spiritual circles, the idea of setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable. Some think it's unkind, unloving, unspiritual. But Buddhism, when rightly understood, teaches the opposite. Compassion without wisdom burns out, and wisdom without boundaries isn't wisdom at all. You're not here to be endlessly available to those who harm you. You're not here to offer your energy to every cry, every manipulation, every demand. You're here to honor the temple of your inner peace. And that means knowing where you end and where someone else begins. This is the next key. Boundaries as compassion, not just for them, but for yourself. Because every time you allow behavior that wounds you, you teach your nervous system that chaos is normal. You betray your own stillness. And the more often that happens, the further you drift from who you really are. But when you say, "This doesn't feel good to me," "I love you, but I will not allow this anymore," you return home. That sentence doesn't need to be shouted. It doesn't need to be explained 20 times. It doesn't need their approval. It just needs to be true. There's a quiet strength in saying no. Not from fear, but from alignment. No, I won't answer calls that leave me anxious. No, I won't explain myself to someone who twists my words. No, I won't keep proving my worth to someone who refuses to see it. And when they push back, because they will, you hold the boundary. You hold it not with anger, but with calm, because you've stopped needing them to understand. You understand. And that's enough. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. They let the right people in and keep the harmful ones out. They create space for real connection, honest presence, mutual respect. And sometimes they reveal who was never willing to meet you there in the first place. That can hurt. The silence that follows, the distance that grows, the stories they tell about you to justify your absence. But none of that defines you. You don't owe your peace to people who refuse to take responsibility. You don't have to keep bleeding just to prove you're kind. Your boundary is not cruelty, it's clarity, and clarity is love. Sometimes love says, "I forgive you and I let go." Sometimes love says, "I see your pain, but I won't let it spill into mine." Sometimes love says nothing, just moves quietly toward peace. And each time you honor that, something inside you softens, not into guilt, but into truth, because you're not closing your heart. You're protecting it so that it can stay open where it's safe to do so. That's the grace of a boundary. It doesn't shout, it doesn't punish, it just holds. It says, I'm not leaving love behind, I'm just choosing not to abandon myself for it. And in that choice you rise, not against anyone, but for yourself. Compassion without attachment. You can care about someone and still walk away. You can wish them peace and still choose never to speak again. You can love deeply, truly, and still decide that love is not a reason to stay. This is one of the hardest lessons for the heart to learn, especially when the person you're dealing with is someone you once trusted, loved, or even needed. But Buddhism teaches that compassion is not about closeness, it's about intention. And your intention can be pure, even from a distance. We've been taught to believe that if you love someone, you should endure them. That loyalty means silence, that kindness means letting them back in again and again, no matter how many times they cut you. But that's not compassion. That's attachment in disguise. Attachment says, I need you to be different so I can feel at peace. Compassion says, I release you as you are and I choose peace anyway. The sixth key to freedom is this: detaching with compassion, not closing your heart. But no longer offering it where it's not respected. You don't have to hate them. You don't have to make them the villain. You don't even have to wish them harm. You simply stop expecting them to be someone they're not, and you stop tying your emotional well-being to that hope. Because every time you hope they'll change, every time you re-enter the same cycle expecting a new outcome, you suffer. And that suffering is optional. It's not cold to detach. It's not cruel to say, I love you and I won't let you near me. It's wisdom. It's what happens when you realize your peace is no longer up for negotiation. Compassion means recognizing their humanity without losing yours. It means saying, I see you, I understand your wounds, I wish you healing, but I will not let your wounds become mine. And the beauty is, once you let go of needing to fix, needing to prove, needing to make it work, something inside you softens. You begin to forgive. Not them, necessarily, but the part of you that stayed too long, the part that hoped too hard, the part that thought love meant sacrifice. You begin to see that you don't have to carry anyone's pain. You don't have to explain your healing. You don't have to wait for their apology to begin again. You can walk away with open hands, with a calm breath, with a heart full of nothing but space. And from that space, something new can grow. Not bitterness, not regret, but freedom. Freedom to be whole without needing to be understood. Freedom to love without needing to possess. Freedom to choose peace, even if they never do. Because in the end, compassion is not about holding on. It's about holding yourself, gently, firmly, completely, and knowing you are enough. That's when the letting go isn't loss, it's grace. When silence is strength, there comes a moment when words no longer serve, when every explanation feels like a loop, when every attempt to clarify, to justify, to make them see leads you nowhere. And in that moment, you feel it rising, the need to say nothing. Not because you've run out of things to say, but because silence has become the truest answer. In a world that values constant response, the practice of silence is radical. In toxic dynamics, it is revolutionary. Buddhism teaches that speech should be timely, true, and beneficial. If it doesn't meet those conditions, it's better to remain silent. Because sometimes your presence says more than your voice ever could. This is the seventh key, choosing silence not as escape, but as power. Toxic people often thrive on reaction. They poke, push, provoke, searching for a crack in your calm. They bait you into arguments, twist your words, and create conflict to maintain control. But when you respond with silence, you remove their fuel. You step out of the battlefield. You let the drama collapse under its own weight. But this silence is not empty. It's full of awareness, full of breath, full of the strength it takes to not fight for what doesn't need to be defended. It's the silence of self-respect, the silence that says, I will not participate in this chaos. I choose peace over being right. I choose presence over explanation. And yes, it can be misunderstood. They may accuse you of being cold, passive-aggressive, or cruel. But let them. That is not your burden to carry. You are not responsible for the stories they create to avoid looking at themselves. Your responsibility is to your peace, to your nervous system, to your sanity. Silence allows your mind to settle. It creates space between impulse and action. And in that space, you hear yourself again. Your truth becomes clear. You stop fighting to be understood, and you start listening to the wisdom within. That wisdom might say, walk away. It might say, wait and watch. It might say, speak later, when your words are medicine, not reaction. Because not all silence is permanent. Sometimes it's a pause, a sacred holding of breath before truth arrives. And when it does, your words come not from pain, but from clarity. Not to wound, but to reveal. But sometimes silence is the last word, the boundary no one sees but everyone feels, the final act of letting go. It says, I don't need to be right. I don't need to be heard by you. I need to be whole with myself. And in that quiet, you rise, you learn to sit with discomfort, to resist the urge to fix, to let the storm pass without stepping into it. This silence is not absence. It's presence in its purest form. It doesn't shrink you. It returns you to your full height. Because the strongest people are not always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones who sit in stillness and smile, knowing not every fire needs to be fought. Some just burn themselves out. Choosing peace over control. There's a hidden tension in every toxic relationship, the urge to control. Sometimes you want to control them, to make them understand, to change, to finally see the damage they cause. Other times you want to control yourself, to never react, never feel, never fall into old patterns. But at the root, it's all the same need to escape discomfort, to force clarity where confusion lives, to feel safe again. But Buddhism teaches that true peace doesn't come from control. It comes from surrendering the illusion that you ever needed it. This is the eighth key, choosing peace over and over, especially when you don't feel in control. In toxic dynamics, you often feel powerless, like someone else is holding the strings of your mind. Their moods dictate your day. Their silence drives your anxiety. Their approval becomes your measure of worth. It happens slowly. One compromised boundary, one more chance, one more conversation where you betray your own needs just to keep the peace. Until you wake up exhausted and realize it was never peace. It was just silence in disguise. The shift begins when you stop trying to fix the relationship and start healing the part of you that believes you need it to be okay. It's not easy. Every part of your nervous system may scream, explain yourself, defend yourself, make them understand. But wisdom whispers something else. You don't need to control this. You just need to stay with yourself. That's the turning point. You no longer need the argument to resolve in your favor. You don't wait for closure that may never come. You don't beg for clarity from someone who thrives in confusion. Instead, you pause, you breathe, you feel the discomfort rising, and you stay. In that stillness, something breaks. Not you, but the illusion. The illusion that they have power over your peace. The illusion that your safety depends on their behavior. The illusion that if you say it right, love enough, bend enough, things will change. And when that breaks, you begin to see clearly. You are free, not because they've changed, but because you no longer seek freedom from them. You've reclaimed it within. Now, when they criticize, you don't crumble. When they ghost you, you don't chase. When they lie, you don't argue. You see it all for what it is, a reflection of where they are, not who you are. You stop trying to control what they feel, what they think, what they say about you. And in letting go of that battle, you find something far more powerful than control: peace. Peace that doesn't rise and fall with someone else's moods. Peace that doesn't require anyone else to be different. Peace that lives quietly in your breath, your body, your truth. That peace is yours now, and no one can take it. Healing the root, not the surface. You can block the number. You can walk away. You can move to another city and erase their name from every trace of your life. But if the wound they touched remains unhealed inside you, their presence will still echo through your thoughts. Because toxic relationships don't just hurt us, they awaken parts of us we haven't yet healed. Buddhist wisdom doesn't ask us to just change our environment. It calls us to look within, to find the seed of suffering and tend to it, not with blame but with understanding. This is the 9th key. Don't just escape the pain, understand why it found you. That doesn't mean it's your fault. You didn't choose to be hurt. You didn't ask to be manipulated. But somewhere along the way, the pain they caused found a home in you. And it stayed, because something in you still believed you deserved it. Maybe you were taught that love comes with conditions. That silence is safety. That being small keeps the peace. Maybe you learned to please, to fix, to sacrifice, just to feel seen. And so when a toxic person entered your life, you didn't just see them, you saw an opportunity to finally get it right, to finally be enough, to finally feel in control. But that's not love. That's trauma, dressed as a second chance. And no amount of trying will ever make them give you what your inner child never received. That healing is yours to do now. Buddhism teaches that suffering ends not by changing others, but by ending the craving that keeps us stuck in cycles of hurt. Craving for approval, for validation, for someone else to fix what was broken long before they arrived. When you bring awareness to that craving, you stop feeding it. You feel it arise, the longing, the hope, the ache. And instead of running to someone else to soothe it, you stay. You breathe through it. You hold it like a child. You let the sadness move without judging it, without trying to escape it. And little by little, you begin to realize it's not about them anymore. It never was. It was always about the parts of you that still needed love, still needed safety, still needed to be chosen by you. And when you give yourself that, everything shifts. You stop choosing people who feel familiar in their cruelty. You stop mistaking drama for passion. You stop tolerating behavior that your healed self would never even notice, because it doesn't belong in your world anymore. That's the power of healing the root. It's not dramatic, it's not loud. It happens in the quiet moments. The night you stop replying, the morning you don't check your phone, the day you look in the mirror and no longer ask what's wrong with you, because you know there's nothing wrong. You're not broken. You were just taught to look for love in places where it was never safe. Now you know better. And with that knowing, you choose differently. You love more slowly. You listen more deeply. You protect your peace with the same fierceness you once used to protect the connection, because the wound is no longer running the show. Your wisdom is. And when that happens, no matter who comes or goes, you remain whole. Letting go without losing yourself. Letting go isn't always loud, it doesn't always look like a final message, a dramatic goodbye or a clean break. Sometimes it's quieter than that. A shift, a decision made in the privacy of your own heart. You wake up one morning and feel it. The weight has lifted, not because they changed, not because they apologized, but because you stopped needing them to. This is the 10th key. Letting go, not in anger, not in fear, but in love for yourself. You didn't fail. You didn't give up. You grew. You saw clearly what is never yours to carry, and you stopped carrying it. That's not weakness, that's strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout. In Buddhist thought, detachment is not cold or distant. It's the warm clarity that says, I release this because I deserve peace more than I need this story to continue. You let go not to hurt them, not to punish them, but to return to yourself, the part of you that was buried under the chaos, the part that whispered over and over, even when you weren't listening. You are allowed to choose peace, and now you have. The person who once made you question your worth no longer holds power. Their silence no longer stings, their patterns no longer confuse you, because you've stopped looking to them for what you can now give yourself: love, respect, freedom. You see them now, fully, clearly, without the filter of hope or fear. And maybe there's still sadness. That's okay, let it be there. Let it move. Let it teach you what it needs to. Then let it pass, because you are not here to fix what someone else refuses to face. You are not here to wait for love where love does not live. You are not here to prove anything to anyone. You are here to live with your heart intact, with your truth intact, with your soul unbroken. And you can do that now, not by controlling, not by convincing, but by choosing. Choosing to close the door without slamming it. Choosing to love from afar if needed. Choosing to move forward, not to escape them, but to return to you. That's the real letting go, and when you look back, it won't be with bitterness, it will be with quiet gratitude, not for the pain, but for what it revealed, for the strength you didn't know you had, for the wisdom you now carry. This is your peace, your path, your healing. Thank you for walking it with me. If this video resonated with you, share it with someone who may need it today. And if you're ready to reclaim your calm in the face of chaos, write this phrase in the comments: I choose peace over control.